Welcome in, everybody, to our deep dive into Niagara 4 security.
Yeah,
Today, we're going to be dissecting the Niagara 4 Hardening Guide,
right.
which is dated March 7, 2023.
Mhm.
Think of this as a blueprint for turning your Niagara 4 system
Yeah.
into a digital fortress, and we're here to help you decipher
Okay.
the most critical security practices.
Yeah, it's a fascinating document, really.
Yeah,
It goes beyond the usual cybersecurity platitudes and gets into the nuts and bolts
right.
of how to actually lock down a Niagara 4
Mhm.
setup.
Yeah, I was immediately struck by how the guide tackles passwords.
Hmm.
We all know they're important, but
Yeah.
this guide dives into some really interesting specifics, like
Right.
the idea of using entire sentences for passwords,
Yeah.
even for something called the system passphrase.
That's a prime example of the guide's practical approach.
Yeah, okay.
The system passphrase is essentially a master key
Yeah.
that protects sensitive data within your Niagara 4 system.
Okay.
Things like user passwords, backups, and Kerberos key tab files.
Okay, so it's like a super secret password that protects all the other passwords.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the guide emphasizes that this passphrase needs to be virtually uncrackable.
Right.
It recommends using long, nonsensical sentences,
Okay.
which are surprisingly effective against brute force attacks.
So instead of trying to remember a random string of characters,
Mm-hmm.
I could use a phrase like, "Purple elephants dance on Tuesdays."
Precisely.
Okay.
It's long, it's
Yeah.
memorable,
Yeah.
and it would take an attacker an incredibly long time to guess.
Right.
And the same principle applies to regular user passwords.
That's actually a pretty clever approach.
Yeah.
It makes strong passwords more user-friendly, which
Yeah.
is a huge win for security.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the guide doesn't stop there. It stresses that strong passwords are just the first line of defense.
Right.
It then moves into the realm of account management,
Okay.
which is all about controlling who has access to your
Yeah,
system
right.
and what they can do once they're in.
Okay, so we've locked the front door with a strong password. Now we need to make sure we're not leaving any windows open, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
The guide emphasizes the importance of separate accounts
Yeah.
for every single user on the platform.
Oh.
No more sharing logins or generic admin accounts.
So if I'm understanding this correctly,
Mm-hmm.
individual accounts mean you have a detailed record
Yes.
of who did what and when,
Yeah.
which is essential for auditing and tracking down
Right.
any suspicious activity.
Precisely. It turns those audit logs
Yeah.
into detective stories,
Okay.
helping you pinpoint any security breaches
Right.
or unauthorized actions.
And the guide goes even further, right?
Yes.
It specifically warns against system integrators
Uh-huh.
using the same platform credentials
Yeah.
across different projects.
That's a major red flag.
Yeah,
Imagine a system integrator using the same credentials for 10 different clients.
right.
If one system is compromised, all 10 are potentially at risk.
It's like using the same key for every house on the block.
The guide is adamant that the platform owner needs to maintain control
Right.
and be aware of the credentials being used.
Okay.
You don't want to be left in the dark
Yeah.
about who has access to your system.
Knowledge is power, and in this case, security as well.
Right.
Okay, so we got strong passwords, separate accounts,
Mm-hmm.
and we're keeping an eye on those system integrators.
Yeah.
What's the next layer of this digital fortress?
The guide then delves into the concept of permissions and roles,
Okay.
which is where the principle of least privilege comes into play.
I've heard of that principle before,
Okay.
but could you break it down in the context of Niagara 4?
Imagine your Niagara system as a building with different security clearances.
Okay.
You wouldn't give the cleaning staff access to the CEO's office, right?
Right.
The principle of least privilege means that each user or role
Okay.
should only have the minimum permissions necessary to do their job.
So a technician who's responsible for monitoring temperatures wouldn't need access to this system's configuration files.
Exactly.
Fair. Right.
This minimizes the potential damage if an account is compromised.
Yeah.
If an attacker gains access to a low privilege account,
Mm-hmm.
they won't be able to wreak havoc across the entire system.
Makes sense. It's like limiting the blast radius of a potential explosion.
The guide also cautions against having too many super user accounts.
Okay.
Super users have unrestricted access to the entire system.
Right.
So having too many of them is like leaving the master key lying around.
So we're limiting access, sticking to the need to know principle,
Mm.
and keeping those super user accounts under lock and key.
Right.
But what about connections to external systems like databases?
That's where the guide's attention to detail really shines.
Okay.
It even addresses external accounts,
Mm-hmm.
emphasizing the importance of minimizing the damage.
Okay.
even if a breach occurs.
Yeah.
Think of it as compartmentalizing your security.
So even if someone manages to break into one part of the system,
Right.
they can't just waltz into the vault and steal all the data.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about creating multiple layers of defense.
Yeah.
Even at the external connection level, the guide wants to make sure
Eh,
you're protected on all fronts.
Okay. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
Strong passwords, careful account management,
Uh-huh.
and now this meticulous approach to permissions.
Right.
We're building quite the digital fortress.
And we're not even done yet.
Oh.
Next, we'll delve into the world of TLS,
Okay.
which is like adding an encryption shield to your fortress.
Sounds intriguing, but before we do, let's take a quick pause for our listeners to absorb all this information.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground already, from the fundamentals of passwords
Mm-hmm.
to the importance of account management and the principle of least privilege.
Right.
Stay with us because we're just getting started. Welcome back to our deep dive into Niagara for security. Before we pause, you were about to explain how TLS adds an encryption shield to our digital fortress.
Yeah. TLS, or Transport Layer Security,
Okay.
is crucial for protecting the data that flows through your Niagara 4 system.
Mhm.
Think of it as encoding messages so that only the intended recipient can read them.
Okay.
It's like sending a secret message in a locked box that only the recipient has the key to open.
So it's not just about protecting the data itself,
Right.
but also the communication channels.
Exactly. TLS secures the connection between various parts of your Niagara 4 system,
Okay.
as well as any external connections.
Okay.
The guide strongly recommends enabling TLS
Yeah.
for all platform connections, those Fox connections used for device communication,
Mm-hmm.
and even web access,
Okay.
ensuring everything runs on HTTPS.
So plain old HTTP is a no-go.
That's the guide's recommendation.
Okay.
It's about closing off potential vulnerabilities and making sure that all communications are encrypted.
Now, setting up TLS usually involves certificates, right?
It can. But the guide acknowledges this
Okay.
and points you to the Niagara Station Security Guide
Yeah.
for in-depth guidance on certificates.
Okay.
But even at a high level, the guide stresses the importance of setting up those certificates correctly
Yeah.
to ensure robust TLS implementation.
So it's like making sure the lock on that secret message box is top of the line.
Precisely. We want to make it as difficult as possible for anyone to intercept and decipher those messages.
Okay.
And speaking of making things difficult for attackers, the guide then delves into some additional layers of protection that go beyond passwords and TLS.
Okay. So we've got the walls, the moats, and now we're adding some extra fortifications.
Exactly. One of the key recommendations is requiring signed program objects and robots.
Okay.
In simple terms, this ensures that only trusted code can run on your Niagara 4 system.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
What exactly are signed program objects, and why is that important?
Think of it like this. Every piece of software, every program or script that runs on your Niagara 4 system needs to have a digital signature that verifies its authenticity and integrity.
Okay.
This signature ensures that the code hasn't been tampered with
Right.
and that it comes from a trusted source.
So it's like a seal of approval from a trusted authority.
Exactly.
Okay.
Confirming that the code is safe to use.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there any other entry points that the guide recommends closing off?
Yes, the guide stresses the importance of disabling SSH and SFTP,
Okay.
unless they're absolutely necessary.
Okay.
These are protocols often used for remote access and file transfer,
Mm-hmm.
and they can be potential entry points for attackers if not properly secured.
Okay, so we're locking down those remote access channels. What about unnecessary services running in the background?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
The guide recommends disabling any services that aren't essential for the operation of your Niagara 4 system. Each running service is like an open door, potentially allowing an attacker to slip through.
So we're minimizing the number of potential entry points, reducing the attack surface.
Exactly. And if a service is absolutely necessary, the guide provides detailed instructions
Okay.
for configuring it securely, especially for services like the web service.
Uh-huh.
It talks about disabling stack traces, enforcing HTTPS for password changes,
Okay.
and even protecting against specific web attacks.
Wow, the level of detail in this guide is impressive.
Right.
It's clear that they've really thought about every possible angle.
They have. And remember, security isn't just about setting things up correctly initially.
Yeah.
It's also about ongoing monitoring and maintenance.
Right.
And here's where the guide's mention of the Niagara Framework API really caught my attention.
The API, isn't that something developers use?
Right.
How does that relate to security monitoring?
The API, or Application Programming Interface, allows developers to interact with the Niagara system
Uh-huh.
at a deeper level.
Okay.
This means that you can use the API to create custom solutions for monitoring and managing security-related events.
Okay, so instead of just relying on the built-in security features,
Right.
we can use the API to enhance our monitoring capabilities.
Precisely. For example, you could use the API to create alerts or notifications.
Uh-huh.
If certain security events occur, like someone trying to access sensitive files,
Okay.
or if those audit logs we talked about earlier reach capacity.
That's brilliant. It's like having a custom-built security system.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's tailored to our specific needs.
I'm starting to see how powerful the API can be in a security context.
It is. And while we're on the topic of proactive measures, the guide also emphasizes the importance of restricting physical access
Okay.
to your JC and Edge controllers, as well as any fieldless devices.
Wait a minute. Physical access. I thought we were talking about cybersecurity, not someone breaking in with a crowbar.
Cybersecurity is about protecting your systems from all kinds of threats,
Right.
including physical ones.
Okay.
Imagine someone gaining physical access to your controllers.
Uh-huh.
They could potentially bypass all your digital security measures.
Okay, so we need to treat those controllers like they're the crown jewels,
Precisely.
keeping them locked away in a secure location.
The guide stresses the importance of storing these devices in restricted areas,
Oh,
limiting access to authorized personnel only.
out of sight, out of mind, and out of reach of those with ill intentions.
Right.
But what about systems that are accessible over the internet?
Okay.
Surely physical security isn't enough to protect them.
That's where VPNs come into play.
Okay.
The guide specifically recommends using VPNs, or virtual private networks,
Uh-huh.
to secure stations exposed to the internet.
VPNs, so those things I use to stream movies from other countries, can also protect my Niagara 4 system.
Well, they're based on the same principle.
Okay.
In this context, a VPN creates a secure, encrypted tunnel
Yeah.
between your system and the outside world, protecting your data from prying eyes.
So it's like having a secret pathway that only authorized users can access?
Exactly. VPNs encrypt all the data that passes through them,
Okay.
making it much harder for attackers to intercept or decipher sensitive information.
Okay, so we've got physical security VPNs for remote access. What else does the guide recommend for strengthening our encryption shield?
The guide delves into a more technical aspect of TLS,
Okay.
Cipher Suite group settings.
Cipher Suite sounds a bit intimidating. Could you break that down for me?
Cipher Suites determine the algorithms and protocols that are used
Okay.
to secure the communication between clients and servers.
Okay.
You have two main options for choosing your Cipher Suite group:
Uh-huh.
recommended and supported.
Recommended probably means the most secure option, right?
You got the recommended setting selects Cipher Suites
Okay.
that are considered the most secure based on current industry standards and best practices.
And supported includes a broader range of options, some of which might be older or less secure.
Exactly. It might include legacy Cipher Suites
Okay.
that are needed for compatibility with older systems or devices that haven't been updated to the latest security standards.
Got it. So sticking with recommended whenever possible is the safest bet.
Absolutely. Now, if your organization has specific security requirements that go beyond the recommended settings,
Mm-hmm.
the guide provides a way to fine-tune your TLS settings
Okay.
by excluding specific Cipher Suites.
So we can customize the encryption to meet our specific needs.
Precisely. It gives you granular control over which encryption algorithms are allowed.
Okay.
Now, we've covered a lot of technical details about securing your Niagara 4 system,
Yeah.
but there's another crucial element that can't be overlooked: the human factor.
Ah, yes. The
Yeah.
human element, we're not just guarding against robots and hackers, but also against our own mistakes, right?
Exactly. The guide emphasizes the importance of training and awareness
Mhm.
for anyone who interacts with your Niagara 4 system.
Okay.
It's about making sure that everyone understands basic security principles and follows best practices to prevent accidental breaches or vulnerabilities.
Makes sense. Even the strongest digital fortress can be compromised if someone leaves the gate open by mistake.
Precisely. Now, one of the most intriguing points in the guide, and one that raises some interesting questions, is the concept of dual approval for certain critical actions.
Dual approval, what does that mean in the context of Niagara 4?
It means that certain actions, such as changing critical system settings or accessing sensitive data,
Okay.
would require approval from two separate individuals.
It's like having a checks and balances system.
Exactly.
Okay.
To prevent any single person from making potentially dangerous changes.
It's a robust security measure.
It is.
But here's the catch. The guide acknowledges that this functionality isn't built into Niagara 4,
Right.
so it's more of a recommendation than a hard and fast rule.
It seems that way, and it makes you wonder how different organizations are implementing this dual approval requirement.
Sure.
Are they using custom scripts, third-party tools, or perhaps even manual processes?
It's a fascinating question and one that highlights the need for creative solutions when it comes to security.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears slightly,
Okay.
the guide also delves into the security implications of module installation.
Modules, are we talking about adding new features or functionalities to the Niagara 4 system?
Precisely. Modules can extend the system's capabilities,
Okay.
but they can also introduce potential security risks if not managed carefully.
So it's like adding new wings to our digital fortress.
Exactly.
We need to make sure those new additions are secure as well.
The guide highlights the importance of carefully scrutinizing module permissions before installation.
Mm-hmm.
Each module requests certain permissions to access different parts of the system or perform specific actions.
So it's like vetting new recruits before we let them into the fortress.
You need to make sure that the permissions requested are justifiable
Right.
and that they don't pose any unnecessary security risks.
Makes sense. Don't give anyone more access than they absolutely need. What else should we be wary of when installing modules?
The guide then introduces the concept of blacklisting, which is essentially a way to block access to certain files or folders that are considered sensitive or potentially vulnerable.
So it's like putting a do not enter sign on certain rooms in our fortress.
Exactly. And the good news is that Niagara 4 already has a built-in blacklisting feature
Okay.
that protects certain critical files and folders.
Okay.
But the guide goes even further and provides instructions
Yeah.
for adding your own items to the blacklist.
So we can customize the blacklist to meet our specific security needs.
Precisely. You can block access to any files or folders that you deem sensitive. Now, we've talked a lot about disabling unnecessary services,
Right.
and this applies to module installation as well.
Right. Each running service is a potential entry point.
Exactly. The guide recommends disabling any unnecessary services associated with the module.
Okay.
It's all about minimizing that attack surface.
Okay, so we're being very selective about which modules we install, scrutinizing their permissions, and making sure to disable any unnecessary services, anything else we need to keep in mind when it comes to modules.
The guide stresses that modules should only be installed from trusted sources. Think of it like vetting the contractors
Got it.
who are building those new wings of your fortress.
Make sure they're reputable and trustworthy.
Precisely now, as we've seen throughout this deep dive, the guide is incredibly thorough
Yeah.
and covers a wide range of security considerations. To help you keep track of everything, it actually provides a handy hardening checklist in the appendix.
A checklist that's incredibly helpful, especially for those of us who aren't cybersecurity experts.
It summarizes all the key recommendations, making it easy to verify
Okay.
that you've implemented all the necessary security measures.
That's a fantastic resource. It takes the guesswork out of securing your Niagara 4 system.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to a point we touched on earlier,
Yeah.
the human element.
Right. Even with the best security technology in place, human error can still be a major factor in security breaches.
Exactly, and the guide really drives this point home, emphasizing the importance of training awareness and good security practices.
It's about making sure everyone who interacts with the system understands their role in maintaining security.
Precisely. Security is a team effort,
Yeah.
and it requires a culture of vigilance and awareness at all levels.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive into the Niagara 4 hardening guide,
Oh?
let's take a moment to reflect on some of the key takeaways
Okay.
and explore those unanswered questions about dual approval and how organizations are implementing it. Welcome back to the final segment of our deep dive into the Niagara 4 hardening guide. We've explored a ton of ground,
Yeah.
from password basics to the nuances of TLS, and even touched on the human element in all of this.
It's been quite a journey through the layers of security
Yeah.
Niagara 4 system requires.
One thing that really stands out to me is the guide's emphasis on a layered approach.
Right.
It's not just about having a strong password or enabling TLS.
Yeah.
It's about building a comprehensive security posture with multiple lines of defense.
Absolutely. It's about creating a system where even if one layer is compromised,
Yeah.
the others are still there to prevent a full-blown breach.
We've talked about strong passwords, meticulous account management, granular permissions,
Yeah.
and securing external connections. It's
Right.
like building a digital fortress with walls, moats, and guard towers.
And let's not forget those secret tunnels.
Right.
Disabling unnecessary services and protocols is crucial to closing off those potential entry points
Yeah.
that attackers could exploit.
Right. We're essentially saying no backdoors allowed
Exactly.
and forcing attackers to face our strongest defenses head on.
And this layered approach extends beyond the purely technical aspects.
Right.
Remember, the human element plays a significant role in security as well.
Right. Those oops, I left the gate open moments can happen to anyone, even with the best technology in place.
That's why the guide stresses the importance of training awareness and fostering a culture of security consciousness
Yeah.
among everyone who interacts with the Niagara 4 system.
We need everyone to be vigilant and understand that their actions, even seemingly small ones, can have a big impact on security.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to revisit that intriguing concept of dual approval
Yes.
that we touched on earlier.
Yes, the guide mentioned that for certain critical actions,
Right.
dual approval is highly recommended.
Mm-hmm.
But how are organizations actually implementing this if it's not a built-in feature of Niagara 4?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah,
Are they developing custom scripts,
yeah.
using third-party tools, or perhaps relying on manual processes and approvals?
It would be fascinating to get a glimpse into how different organizations are tackling this challenge. It highlights the fact that security often requires creative solutions and a willingness to think outside the box.
Absolutely. Security is rarely a one-size-fits-all proposition.
Yeah.
It requires careful planning, adaptation, and a deep understanding of the system you're trying to protect.
Well, I think we've squeezed every last drop of insight out of this Niagara 4 hardening guide.
Okay.
We've covered an impressive amount of information.
From password basics to the complexities of TLS, from physical security to the importance of the human element,
Right.
this guide has provided a roadmap for building a truly resilient security posture for your Niagara 4 system.
One final takeaway I want to emphasize is that security is not a destination. It's a journey.
Well said. It's an ongoing process of assessment, adaptation, and improvement.
Yeah.
The threats are constantly evolving, so our defenses need to evolve as well.
So to our listener, as you continue on your own security journey, remember the principles we've discussed today.
Right.
Build those layers of defense, stay informed, and never underestimate the power of a security-conscious culture.
And remember, the Niagara 4 Hardening Guide is a valuable resource
Yeah.
that you can always refer back to. It's packed with practical advice and insights to help you navigate the complex world of cybersecurity.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Niagara 4 security.
Yeah.
Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.
For